Welcome to Sweet Silver Song, the podcast telling stories about our favourite football club, Liverpool. My name is Mark Kerr, a lifelong Liverpool supporter. Watched my first match in 1965 and I now work as a tour guide at Anfield. However, these are not official podcasts of Liverpool Football Club. They are made independently by supporters with love. Now, the podcasts do cost us money to produce and publish, and we do need financial support. This episode is sponsored by Brantones, a Liverpool-based developer who designs and builds houses for housing trusts. Brantones is looking for plots of land suitable for residential development between half an acre and 2 acres, and an acre is about the size of a football field. Today I am delighted to welcome my special guest, former Liverpool player George Scott. Now, he was one of Bill Shankly's very first signings, and if you haven't heard of him, don't worry. George never made the first team, but he has written a tremendous book about his experiences at Anfield, The Lost Shankly Boy. And I posted a link to his book on our website and on the podcast notes. Welcome, George.
Hello, Mark. Nice to be here. Lovely to meet you and lovely to be here.
It's great to see you as well. Just to give the background to you, you were born and raised in Aberdeen. You were an Aberdeen supporter, the Dons, and you actually were offered terms to sign for Aberdeen as an apprentice professional. But before you committed yourself to signing for them, I believe Liverpool came in for you. Now, how did Liverpool find you up in Aberdeen?
Well, it was destiny, I think, really, because the caretaker or the janitor in our school, I was only 15, he was a scout for Liverpool. And I didn't know he was a scout for Liverpool. Whoa. None of us did, really. Yeah. And I was playing for Aberdeen schools, select, and I was playing for Scotland schools. And his name was Jim Lorney. He was an ex-goalkeeper with St Mirren. And Jim asked me if I'd be interested in going for a trial to Liverpool Football Club. Now, I never knew anything about Liverpool. Neither did my parents or my family. They were a second division team, going nowhere apparently. But I did know about Bill Shankly, because Bill Shankly had signed Denis Law, and Denis was my idol. Right. And he, from Aberdeen, he played for Aberdeen schools 3 or 4 years before me. And I used to watch him driving around Aberdeen in his red Jaguar, and I wanted to be like Denis. So basically, I agreed to go. My mother and stepfather, were persuaded to let me go. I looked upon it as a holiday, really. I came down and I had 3 games trial in the C team with Gordon Wallace. Met Gordon and we played 3 games. We both scored goals in the 3 games and did well. At the end of the week, Gordon went to see Bill and he was offered terms, £7 a week, I think it was, and he accepted. And then Bill pulled me in his office and asked me if I should I wanted to come to Liverpool. And I told Bill that I was an Aberdeen supporter. I'd agreed to sign for Aberdeen for £6 a week. And my grandmother, I said to him, didn't even know where Liverpool is. And Shankly said, you tell her, son, you tell her. We're in the second division at the moment, but we'll be in the first division next year. Soon everybody will know where Liverpool is. And when he said that, it was like a bullet to the heart. It really affected me. And I went back to Aberdeen. I told my mum and my stepfather, my brothers, I was going to Liverpool. I wanted to go to Liverpool. And that was as simple as that. And eventually, I did go to Liverpool.
Okay, so let's put this into context. This was January 1960, I believe.
Yes.
And, of course, Bill Shankly famously arrived at Anfield on the 1st of December 1959. So Bill Shankly had been in post a month. And already he's on the lookout for bright young talent, yeah?
Yeah.
When you said yes to Bill Shankly, I say you didn't know where we were, except we were in the second division. But Bill was so confident, wasn't he, that we'd be in the first division the next season. There was no doubting that, was there?
No doubt at all. But of course, when I came down, I met Gordon again, Gordon Wallace, and Bobby Graham.
Yeah.
Because basically what Bill had done, he wanted to get some of the best young players in the UK. He wanted to be a bit like Matt Busby with the Busby Babes. Yeah. And he signed Bobby Gordon himself and Tommy Smith and Chris Lawler, local lads. And an interesting story when I first met Tommy and Chris. Shankly brought us into the office and said, I want you to meet these 2 boys, local boys. He said, they're both going to be big stars. You all are. And that was the first introduction to Tommy and Chris.
I believe that there were 5 Scottish players that Bill Shankly signed. You mentioned three of them. Tommy Smith and Chris Lawler. You were all about the same age, weren't you? You were all about 15, going on 16.
We're all schoolboys, yeah. Chris and Tommy were local schoolboys, played for Liverpool boys. Bobby Gordon and myself all played in Scotland. But Gordon actually came from Llanelli in South Wales, although he was born in Glasgow. But they actually lived in South Wales. They did 5 Scotsmen. There was a guy called Hamish Mackenzie, a fullback, and Phil Tinney, who was a left winger. And they were both brilliant players as well. And another lad called Alex Totten, who went on to become one of the most famous managers in Scottish football. So we were all together. We all lived in digs together in Anfield Road.
Oh, right. So on the doorstep, not far to go to work.
258 Anfield Road, that was our lodgings.
And that's the White House that faces down Arcus Lane, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still there today. Yeah, still there today. Every time I go to Anfield, I look at the 3 windows and say, that's our bedroom where we used to stay.
I mean, to be honest with you, very close to John Holding's house, Stanley House.
Yes.
Which is on the opposite side of the road, just slightly towards Anfield Stadium, yeah.
Yeah, and the Arkle's pub, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Chris Lawler, and he was famously a very quiet man, wasn't he? He didn't say much. You tell the story, it's quite a well-known Shankly story, but I love it, about when you were playing a 5-a-side game.
Yeah.
Shankly was playing. I think it was the coaching staff, wasn't it, against the youngsters usually?
Yeah.
And you had shoes for goals, was that right? Boots for goals?
Yeah, what do you call them? Pumps, basketball boots type, and it's in the car park.
Yeah.
It's behind the main stand,
right,
which is now the main stand, but of course it was completely different then at the car park. And we used to put the pumps down and use the wall for the other end. And be Bob Paisley, Joe Fagan, Reuben Bennett, Ronnie Moran sometimes, Shankly, and myself and Bobby and Gordon and Tommy and Chris. We'd play 5-a-sides.
Okay. But in this particular game, I think Chris was injured or something, couldn't take part, but he was watching it, and then there was a disputed goal, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's a couple of good stories about Chris, really. I mean, and the reason, it stems from the fact that he was quite quiet. We called him the Silent Knight, because he never used to speak hardly, He did all his talking with his feet. But that game you're talking about was in the car park, and Chris was injured after about 5 or 6 minutes of the game. So we were down to 4 men. And Shankly and Paisley and Fagan and the rest, they were buoyant because they're much older than us. They were in the 40s. We were only kids, teenagers, 16, 17. And they used to cheat, desperate to win.
Yeah.
And Chris was watching the game, and Tommy Smith was defending the goal. Shankly chipped it over his head and went over the pump. And Shankly shouts, right, goal, time up, boys, get changed, get showered. And Tommy Smith says, no, boss, that wasn't a goal. That went over the pump. Yeah. Shankly said, it's a goal, son, I'm the manager, get changed. No, boss, no, it didn't, it went over the pump. Chris, Shankly said, you're standing in a perfect view, was that a goal, son? And Chris said, no, boss. Shankly says, Christ, the boy's taken about 2 years to speak. His first word's a lie. He said bloody lie, actually, but I mean, cut that out.
I mean, the funny thing is, although I know the story and I knew what the punchline was, it's still funny.
And the other story with Chris is, you'll know this, Chris was a phenomenon. He played, I don't know how many games, 460 games for Liverpool. In one period, he went 7 years without missing a game. He might have missed 2 games. Anyway, we're playing 5-a-sides at Melwood. Goes over on his ankle, and he's hobbling off to the pavilion at Melwood. Well, later on that afternoon, he's in the treatment room, and Shankly and Paisley come up the passage, and they see him coming out the treatment room with a limping, And Shankly said to Paisley, he said, there's that malingerer Lawler. Didn't like you when you were injured, Bill.
Oh, no, believe not. So, yeah, I mean, that reminds me of Phil Neal, who famously played 417 consecutive matches for Liverpool, which is fantastic. Like 8.5 seasons, basically.
Unbelievable.
That included playing when he had a broken toe. And I believe the coaching staff gave him an oversized boot, packed the end with tissue paper, and said, don't tell the boss.
Yes, right.
So he played with a broken toe, and Bob Paisley was the manager, and was never told about it. It was incredible. But they don't make him like that anymore, do they, George?
No, Gordon Wallace was always injured. That was one of his big problems. He was a great player, Gordon, really would have been a big star. But he had brittle bones and he kept getting injured. And, it was a bit of a thing in the club that Gordon was just getting started, then he'd get injured. And again, once Shankly sees Gordon coming out with his arm round Albert Shelley's shoulder limping, walking stick. And Shankly said, Wallace's walking stick's been sold and healed twice. It's had more operations than him.
Well, let's talk about Gordon Wallace, because he's not a very well-known player, because he only had quite a short career at Liverpool, but he has 2 historic firsts for Liverpool. So the first one is he scored our very first goal in Europe, didn't he?
In Europe at Reykjavik, yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah. Fantastic.
So our first match was away in Iceland. It was the preliminary round of the European Cup. We're flying into the unknown here, aren't we? Did you go on the trip to?
No, I didn't. But I mean, at the time when I'm not sure who was injured. I think it was St John, and Gordon got. I always thought it was going to be between me and Gordon to get in that game. Yeah. The thing is with me, Mark, I was very unlucky, and I'll go into this perhaps later, but I was the leading goal scorer in the second team for 3 consecutive seasons, and had the most appearances in the second team for 3 consecutive seasons. But for some unaccountable reason, I couldn't just quite make that little break in, Gordon got his chance against West Bromwich when Tommy Lawrence made his debut the same day. And he had a wonderful game. I mean, he really ran Don Howe ragged.
All right.
And that was he was a talented player, Gordon, as was Bobby. And in all modesty, so was I. But the bottom line is, there was no substitutes.
Yeah.
And so it was limited opportunities for all of us. Yeah. Even Bobby didn't get in the team until much later. Regularly.
I think he's one full season.
One full season he played every
70,
game,
wasn't it?
And he had a bad injury, ankle injury, which stymied his career. But he was a wonderful player, as Gordon was as well. And they would have been, and me as well, I think, would have been regulars in any other club. Yeah. But because you had Callaghan, Hunt, St John, Smith, and Thompson holding us out, we just had to keep going and keep going. And Gordon only had about 15 games, and he should have had many more.
But the other historic first, of course, was he scored the first ever goal on Match of the Day.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Black and white. Yeah.
I mean, I never saw Match of the Day for quite a long time, because it went out first of all on BBC Two. Yeah. And I believe the audience for the first episode was like in tens of thousands, not even hundreds of thousands. Yeah. And by the time it transferred to BBC One, it was sometime in the mid to late 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It must have been 64.
I think it was later than that, but I think we definitely had it by 65, 66.
Yes.
And there is Gordon Wallace scoring the very first goal against Arsenal. Yeah. We beat them 3-2, didn't we? And in fact, he scored 2, didn't he? In that game?
Scored 2, yeah. And he played against West Ham in the final, the Charity Shield, which was at Anfield for some unaccountable reason, the final. Yeah. And I'm not sure whether he even scored in that game. But he didn't score many goals, but he scored very important goals. And they're etched in history. In fact, there was a question on Mastermind. I watched the one night, who scored Liverpool's very first goal in the European Cup? Was it Ian St John, Roger Hunt, or Gordon Wallace? And the contestant got it wrong.
Well, I'm going to tell you something now you didn't know. I did Mastermind. My specialist subjects included the history of Liverpool Football Club, and I got to the final.
Wow.
And I only got one question wrong on Liverpool. I'll ask you, I don't think you'll know it because I didn't know it. So the first all Merseyside Cup final, it was the League Cup final, or the Milk Cup final in 84. Who was the referee?
I wouldn't know.
I guessed there was I guessed Neil Midgley, because he was a Cheshire-based referee and whatever. And it turned out to be a guy called Alan Robinson, who I've never heard of.
Tough question.
Yeah, but that's the only one I got wrong.
You did well. Fantastic, The only referee I can remember from that, really remember, is Jack Taylor. Yeah. Because he cost us the FA Youth Cup final.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because that was probably the highlight of your playing career at Liverpool, wasn't it?
It was a fantastic experience. We would have been the first ever Liverpool team to win the FA Youth Cup, and we won the first leg at Anfield 3-1. Yeah. And I at the underside of the bar with a head on the last minute in the cup end, and it would have gone in. We'd been 4-1. We went to West Ham the following week, and we lost the game on aggregate 6-5, and we scored first at Upton Park. So we were actually leading 4-1. Yeah. Then they scored 4-2. Then we scored again 5-2. And so, Bobby Graham then hit the post. And then they came back. Harry Redknapp was on the right wing. He was 17. Yeah. John Sissons on the left wing. They're a really good team. John Charles, he played in the FA Cup final.
Not the John Charles who played for Leeds.
John Charles. Yeah. But they were a good team, and we were a good team, and we were a better team, really, but fate conspired against us.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing was the winning goal was scored by a lad called Martin Britt, and the cross come over from Harry Redknapp, and our goalkeeper, Rodney Swindlehurst, his name was, he jumps up and catches it just about on the line, and this centre-forward Britt put his shoulder to him, and he went in the goal with the ball and everything, and Jack allowed the goal. That's where Shankly was incandescent. In fact, he was really annoyed. Tommy Smith was incandescent. I think he got booked, Tommy, at the end of the game for continually remonstrating with the referee. And the next time Tommy saw Jack Taylor at Anfield when he was in the first team following the season, they're going up the steps onto the pitch behind Jack, and he taps Jack on his shoulder, and he says, "I'll save you the trouble, Smith, number 4." And the other funny thing was in that cup final, the first one, Anfield, we were in the dressing room and Shanks was giving us our talk, and he said to Tommy, he said, "This boy Sissons in the left wing, Tommy, he's a flyer. I want him in the bandbox in 10 minutes. Tommy duly obliged. He hobbled off. Sissons hobbled off, and he was shouting to John Bond, the manager, thing, "Psycho, he's a psycho." He says, "Smith, Tommy Smith."
So, of course, there was no substitutes.
No,
back in the day.
That was a big problem for us.
So injured players would have to sort of hobble on up playing on the wing or whatever.
Yeah,
they?
Like in the cup final when Gerry Byrne played the whole game with a broken collarbone.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that now then. So 1965, we get to our second Wembley Cup final. The first one since 1950, which of course we lost to Arsenal 2-0. And in about the 4th minute, wasn't it? There was Gerry Byrne and Bobby Collins went for the ball. Gerry Byrne went for the ball, and Bobby Collins, in typical Leeds fashion, put his foot over the ball and just barged into Gerry.
Yeah.
But he basically shoulder charged him in the chest, didn't he? Gerry Byrne, who was a hard man.
Oh, yeah, the hardest man in the club.
Yeah.
Shankly said that.
Yeah. He went down, and Bob Paisley realised straight away he'd broken his collarbone. So I think that they wanted him to go off, didn't they?
Yeah, he didn't go off. And in fact, he laid on the goal for Roger, I think.
Yeah.
He crossed the ball for Roger to score.
Yeah.
First goal.
Yeah.
Marvellous man, Gerry. Wonderful. Wonderful. He was always good to me, good to us young players. And he was hard as nails, really tough. Shankly tells a lot of stories about Gerry, about being hard. But I'd be here all day if I was telling you,
I remember that the cop nickname for him was Crunch.
Yeah.
And the other thing I remember about Gerry Byrne was he was very reluctant to just hoof the ball out, no matter how much pressure he was under. Yeah. It's about playing the ball from the back. Gerry Byrne would be surrounded by players, and he would refuse to just launch it. And eventually, he managed to find a little pass through to a teammate, and we always saying, just welly it. And afterwards we go, "Oh, cool as a cucumber, Gerry. Cool as a cucumber."
Yeah, he was. Yeah, wonderful player, wonderful fullback. Got cap for England as well. But he was unlucky, like Peter Thompson and Gerry and Ian Callaghan. They're all in the England squad for the World Cup, the initial squad. And none of them got picked because Alf Ramsey dispensed with wingers. Yeah. In fact, Peter Thompson was at my wedding because I got married the same day England won the World Cup. And Peter and I, in fact, I was talking recently online to Geraldine, Chris's wife. And she said to me, "Do you remember at your wedding, you and Peter and me were watching the World Cup final in London Road in a shop window, because our reception was at Sampson and Barlow's in London Road, right, when the World Cup final was on." Yeah. And so, I was a groom. Me and Peter and Geraldine are watching the game. You should have been there.
Hang on, you're Scottish? Why? You wanted Germany to win, did you?
Well, the interesting thing was in the service, in the church, towards the end of the service, somebody shouted. I thought, "Oh, that's nice," and it was because the Germans had equalised. Yeah, just Scottish members of the family shouting at the back of the church.
Yeah, there's lots of stories about that, isn't there? I think they asked Denis Law, did he enjoy the World Cup final? He says, "No, I went playing golf. I wasn't going to watch England playing the World Cup."
I'm not like that. I wanted England to win the World Cup. I did. I was delighted, of course, the following year when Scotland beat them at Wembley and we became unofficial world champions.
Absolutely, yes.
And broke the crossbar.
Yes. Yeah. Talk about Denis Law. You tell a lovely story when Bill Shankly introduced you to Denis. Yeah. Because although you're both from Aberdeen and you'd seen him play, you didn't really know him, did you?
No, I knew his brother Joey, Joey Law, and I knew him on and off, not on a personal side.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I've said hello to him, and when he was in Aberdeen, as an admirer really than anything else, And that particular story you're referring to was when I was only, I think I was barely 16, and Shankly said to me, just out of the blue, he said, "I'm going to take you over to meet your idol son. He's playing at Goodison tonight," and he was playing against Everton for Man City.
Yeah.
It was a pouring rain night, I remember. So off I went to Goodison. Met Bill. He went off with Bob into the main stand, and I wasn't with him during the game, watching the game. And then at the end of the game, he did a read for me to meet at the players' entrance. So I met Bill and Reuben at the players' entrance, and Bill proceeds to take me into the Goodison dressing room. Bear in mind, a game had just finished, been pouring a rain, mud everywhere. He bangs on the dressing room door. He barges into the Man City dressing room, drags Denis out. He's still got his shirt outside his pants, mud in his face. Boots, one boot on, one boot off. And he says to me, he said, "Denis, I want you to meet this boy here, Georgie Scott." He said, "He's from Aberdeen, he's going to be better than you, son." And Denis said, "He does tend to exaggerate, son." So that was the first time I met Denis. He was wonderful, spoke to me for about 5 minutes. And I danced all the way back to Anfield, It was like meeting my idol, And I met Denis quite a few times after that, and I got quite friendly with him. But that was the first time I met him.
My Denis Law story is, of course, you remember the Saint Etienne game. One of the most iconic nights in our
Davy
history.
Fairclough.
And I was locked out. So, back in those days, the match wasn't live on the telly. It wasn't even live on the radio. I think they were only allowed to broadcast the second half, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So, we drove back home, put on radio, what was now Radio 5 Live, and got the second half commentary. And of course, if you remember what happened, we lost the away leg 1-0. Kevin Keegan scored very early on, directly off a corner, made it 1-0. But then in the second half, with about half an hour to go, they scored a goal. Denis just hit this shot. He swerved all over the place, and no goal in earth could have got it. And Clemens just couldn't get anywhere near it. Now we were in massive trouble, and we had to score 2 goals in the last half an hour. So when Denis scores that goal, Denis Law, who was the expert summariser on the radio, and he says, "Well, that's it." He said, "Liverpool had a good go tonight." He said, "You have to say, Saint Etienne are a class team. They should have been European champions last season. They were very unlucky to lose to Bayern Munich in the final. But they've got too much class for Liverpool tonight, and that's that." And of course, we famously came back and won 3-1. As you say, David Fairclough scored a classic winning goal, coming on as a sub. So that's in 1977. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. So in 1981, we get to the final in Paris, and we are staying at the Hotel Le Palais de Trianon in Versailles. And guess who's staying there? The Liverpool squad and the media. Who stood on the steps of the hotel but Denis Law? He's completely unmistakable, isn't he? There's only one Denis Law. And I thought, I'm not a word of him. So I don't think I waited for the car to stop. I pushed the door open, sort of walked over to Denis, and I said, "Oh, hello, Denis." And of course, he's a lovely man. He goes, "Hello, son, how are you?" With his big smile, shaking hands and whatever. I said, "I've got a bone to pick with you." He looked at me. I said, "Saint Etienne," and he went, "Oh no!" And his face just collapsed. And he said, "Every Liverpool fan who listened to that on the radio has never let me forget it." He said, "I'm really, really sorry." He said, "Look, I love Liverpool. But I idolised Bill Shankly. Of course, I wanted Liverpool to win. But at that time, I thought they'd blown it,
We all did.
Yeah, but a lovely man.
Well, in the book, there's a story I gave me, Denis, in later life. I mean, I met him a number of times, and there's 2 occasions, really, which was quite interesting. One was when I was working in sales, and I had a very successful sales management career over the years. And I was working in sales, and one of the benefits was we got to go to the arena in Birmingham, the golf exhibition. And Denis was there with John Letter's golf clubs. He represented him. And I had this guy that used to work for me. He was a scratch golfer from Scotland, a lad called Nicky Gold. And we spotted Denis in the John Letter's pavilion. And he saw me right away. And he stopped whatever he was doing. He came over and we were chatting away. I introduced Nicky to him, got his autograph. He was thrilled, And Denis was chatting away there, and the John Letters people were shouting, "Come on, Denis, we've got a schedule to meet." And he said, "I'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to my pal." Wonderful. He said, "Bill Shankly said your boss was going to be better than me." He said, "But he meant as a salesman, not as a footballer."
Like, nice one.
And he was right. Sadly, Denis went into sales after he left Manchester, which is amazing. He worked for Francis Lee, selling toilet rolls.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing was, I met him twice when I was working for one of the, and twice I gave him leads, for companies, and he really appreciated it, and he did well from these leads. Anyway, again, later on, he'd been doing the after summaries in Manchester United against Plymouth in the FA Cup. And, at the end of the game, he asked Tommy Docherty if he could come back on the plane with the Manchester United team, because he had a meeting with Francis Lee in Wigan, and he said office early the following morning, and they refused to let him on the plane. They basically said, no press, we're not allowing any media. Anyway, Denis was telling me the story. I said, that's terrible. He said, what do you think, Georgie? He said, they might have made an exception, mightn't they? I said, no, Denis, you relegated them.
Yes. Of course.
You saw the joke. You laughed.
Well, also true.
And he did. He backheeled it in the net.
Yeah, he did. He was devastated there, wasn't he? You could see.
Yeah.
He really... He was doing his job as a professional, but he was devastated when he realised what he'd done.
Great man, wonderful player. Like most of those players are from that generation. All the big players, no side to them. Very natural, speak to anybody. It's a changed day now. Not quite as easy now for the players.
I went to... I was invited to a lunch event in Manchester, and it was George Best and Denis Law, and like a sportsman's lunch, if you like. And I was hosted, so I thought, well, that'll be good. I'm going to be taken out for lunch, going to get to see and hear Denis Law and George Best, and probably get a few drinks and stuff. And yeah, brilliant. This was on a Monday lunchtime, but it was the Monday following the George Best incident on the telly when he was drunk.
Yeah, Parkinson or something, was it one of the shows?
Or Wogan, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was one of those interview programmes. And then, of course, after that happened, he went to ground and nobody could find him. So we're all saying, well, will he be here or not? Will he turn up? Denis Law turns up, and where's George? And eventually George Best appears and looks a bit sheepish, but so Denis Law says, well, it's a question and answer session. On your table, the sheets of paper, write down your question, hand it in, and then we'll start have a look and we'll pick the best ones. So we have our lunch, and over lunch people are writing questions. And then he says, right, okay, we've got the Q&A starting now. So Denis, do you want to go first? And Denis says, yeah, I'll just pick the first question up here. Okay, George, what happened on Wogan on Friday? And sat down.
Oh, God.
And George is going, oh, no, you've dropped me right in it. But, of course, I mean, that's just typical Denis Law, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, that is
it's just impish sense of humour.
A flawed genius, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, George, yeah, very much so, yeah. One of your pals, of course, was Bobby Graham, a Scotsman like yourself from Motherwell.
Yes.
Obviously, he lived on Anfield Road, I believe.
Lived about 2 blocks further down, yeah.
But Bobby actually got his chance to play in the first team, didn't he? In fact, he had a pretty spectacular debut, didn't he?
He scored a hat-trick in his debut against Aston Villa, yeah. And he was only very young at the time. I think he must have been 17, I think, something like that, It was wonderful for him, really. I mean, he played a couple more games, and of course, like most of us, he was out in the reserves again because St. John was back in the team and Roger was back in the team. Yeah. So, he lost his place like most of them for a while. And it took him a while to become a regular. I mean, he only really became a proper regular in 1969. Yeah. It was 69, 70.
Yeah, yeah.
He played 50 games, every single game, I remember in that. See, I'd left the club by then, but I used to follow his career, obviously, when I was playing at whatever I was. And it was marvellous to see him being so consistent. And yet, a year later, he was sold to Coventry.
My favourite goal of his was the goal at Goodison Park in the Derby match, the famous Derby, when Sandy Brown scored the own goal at the Park end. The first goal was a far post header by Emlyn Hughes. He kind of sort of headed it onto his shoulder, and somehow he got it over the line. Bobby rounded it all off beautifully. I think it was a through ball. I think it was from St. John, and he was in the clear, and he very coolly took it round the goalkeeper and rolled it into the empty net. Wonderful goal. But unfortunately, in the October of 1970, we were playing Chelsea at Anfield. I was there, and I remember distinctly the ball was going to go out of play on the Kemlyn Road side of the pitch. Bobby went to try and stop it from going out, and somehow or other, he got his foot over the ball, didn't he?
Yeah, yes.
Rolled his ankle over the ball and broke his ankle.
Yeah, sadly. it really stopped him then. He never really recovered from that at Liverpool. He went on to have a lot of success in Scotland.
Yeah.
Back with his hometown team, Motherwell, and Hamilton Academicals as well. He scored loads of goals up there. He was very friendly with the Saint. Both come from Motherwell.
Yeah.
And Ian looked after him. I think Ian took him to Coventry when he was manager there.
Yeah.
And eventually up to Motherwell. So, I mean, he had a great career in Scotland, but he could have had a much greater career at Anfield, I think, if he'd have broken a bit sooner. Maybe. Yeah. But again, we were all had that gatekeepers, those 5 gatekeepers, Callaghan, Hunson, John, Smith and Thompson. Yeah. And they never got injured. And people used to say to Bill, "What's your team on Saturday?" Same as last season.
So I mentioned in my introduction to you that Bill Shankly said you were the 12th best player in the world. Do you want to tell me how come he came to say that to you?
Yeah, it was after the cup final. I went down to the cup final with Peter Thompson and all the boys. The 1-2-1, fantastic. Came back for 500,000 people in the streets up at the town hall. Shankly standing there with his arms astride, big white horse. It was unbelievable.
I was there. I was only
lovely. You remember it? It was a fantastic occasion.
I'd never seen grown men cry before like that.
No,
they were absolutely in tears. I'm getting a bit teary now thinking about it because we had waited 73 years for this occasion.
That's right. Yeah.
And we never thought it would come. And every Evertonian you ever met would say, "Oh, you support Liverpool, do you, lad? Yeah. Come back and talk to me when you've won the FA Cup, lad." Yeah. And it was so frustrating. And I said to my dad, how come he'd never won the FA Cup? He said, "Look, don't worry about it." He said, "They haven't won it for 30-odd years."
Yeah. Well, I remember walking up the pitch behind Bob and Bill and listening to them talk about an hour and a half, 2 hours before the game. There was a slight drizzle going on, and a lot of the Liverpool fans were already in there, and, thousands of them. And Shankly said to Bob Paisley, he said, "We can't lose for this crowd, Bob. It's not an option." I always remember that, his words.
I think that's probably a similar sentiment and feeling to Rome 77, because when the players walked out at the Olympic Stadium, having lost the cup final on the Saturday, and they saw a sea of red and white,
unbelievable.
They thought, "We can't lose this.
We're very lucky, aren't we?
Losing's not an option here. We've got to win this game for these guys."
Yeah.
And I think Wembley was the same on it.
Well, going back to your question about this quote that Shankly said, was after the cup final, after that parade, we came back to the digs in Lily Road off Prescott Road, where Peter and I lived. And there was a letter for me on the mat, and I opened the letter, and it said that I thought the letter was going to be new contract next year, because I was a leading goal scorer that year in the Central League by about 8 goals. Yeah. So, I mean, I was sailing along at that. I think I scored 7 goals in 3 games.
Wow.
At one stage. Anyway, I opened it up and it said, "We've accepted a bid, a transfer from Aberdeen Football Club for £12,000 from Eddie Turnbull." So I was shattered. Part of me was, I'm thinking Aberdeen, but I wasn't thinking that way. I was thinking Liverpool. Why am I leaving Liverpool? I've been there 5 years. Yeah. I've done everything. I've scored loads of goals in all the teams I've played for. Even the game before the cup final, I didn't get a game. And Shankly played about half a dozen, maybe more reserves.
Yes.
Some of whom had only had a couple of games in the first team.
Was it
in the reserve team.
Was it Wolves?
Wolves, yeah. And he told me the reason for that was he'd committed to the transfer, and Eddie Turnbull, the manager of Aberdeen, didn't want me to play. Now, whether that was true or not, I don't know, but that's what he told me. But I didn't play, and I wished I had played, because I would have had that one league game. Yeah. And I would have maybe scored. Who knows? Yeah. Fate's a funny thing. It's fine margins. I mean, even in 1964, we went 63, I think it was, on tour of America. Yeah. And it was a 6-week tour. And I had my bag and I had my injections and I had all ready to go. And the club signed Phil Chisnell 10 days before the tour. And Shankly pulled me in the office and said to me that, "Sorry, son, there's only 20 places and we just signed Phil Chisnell for 30,000. You have to miss out. Go home and get yourself fit. Next season's a big season for you." And he wrote that. I've got a letter here. Yeah. He wrote it to me.
It's in the book, isn't it?
Yeah. And, so I went back in all faith and got stuck in for the next season. But they went to America for 5 weeks. And there was one game, I think they won 14-1. And Alfie Harrisby scored 6. And I thought, well, I'd have scored goals over there. I would have had a chance. But the interesting thing was, going back to the story about Shankly speaking to me, he pulled me in the office after the Inter Milan game. We played Inter Milan in the semi-final of the European Cup, which was just after the cup final. And I went in. It was a very emotional meeting because Bill looked upon me as almost like a son, I think. Yeah. Because he brought me down at the age of 15. He told me Mum would look after me, him and Reuben, because Reuben was from Aberdeen. And there it was having to tell me that I'm going. And he broke it to me as gently as he could, you know. And he said, look, son, he said, George, he said, you're 20 years of age. You need first team football. These boys are not going anywhere. They're all internationals. Yeah. I've sold you to Aberdeen. It's your first love. You're back with your mum. You're back with your family. You're getting the first team there. You make a name for yourself in Scotland. It's the right decision. And I said, tears were coming down my face. I was only a young lad, you know. And he said, and remember this, son, he said, at this moment in history, you're the 12th best player in the bloody world. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, the first team's just won the league, son, and we've won the cup. These are the best 11 players in the world. He said, and you're the 12th best. You're the leading scorer and the leading scorer in the reserve team, Central League team, you know. And I thought, oh, God, no, that's a load of rubbish. Anyway, then, this was the most emotional part. As I got out and went to leave his office, he put his arm on my shoulder and he said to me, and I can remember it vividly, he said, think of yourself, son, just think of yourself. It's the foundation stone of the Liverpool Cathedral. Nobody will ever see that stone, son. Without the stone being there, the cathedral won't be built. Yeah. And I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. Yeah. My mind was all over the place, you know. But it's only years later I suddenly realised what he was saying about the shared experience and that everybody's important and the club only gets built through the players. And he also said, you're one of the first players to come here, son, and sign for me. He said, all the very best, he said. Anyway, I went up to Aberdeen and I did really well and all the rest of it. But after I left Aberdeen, I was going to South Africa to play in South Africa. And I went to see him in his office and he gave me a reference. And the reference is one of the most amazing references you'll ever see. And it got me my first job after football in sales. And it says, dear people, George Scott played for my football club for 5 years. During that time, he never caused no trouble to nobody. I would stake my life on his character. W. Shankly in red ink. Now, that's my most precious possession. That's going to my oldest son when I pass away. Yeah. And I wouldn't go anywhere else. I'd never sell it. No. You know, he was an absolute amazing man.
Well, it doesn't get any stronger recommendation in life, does it? Than that?
No, and it's something to live up to, and I've tried my best to live up to it for the rest of my life, really.
I'm fascinated, really, by the whole boot room thing at Anfield, because obviously Shankly was the manager, Bob Paisley was the trainer. I realised, obviously, that included things like being the physiotherapist. And,
Joe Fagan was the reserve team trainer at the time.
And you obviously would play. You were
playing Joe all the time for 4 years.
He was basically your manager, wasn't he, in the reserve team? And you've got Reuben Bennett as coach. Now, to me, a coach is someone like Arsene Wenger or whatever, who, you know, goes through all the sort of maybe the tactics or maybe some sort of moves that you might use in a match or whatever, or maybe free kick routines. But that wasn't what Reuben Bennett did, was it?
No, Reuben was the sergeant major. Right. Reuben kept us in check. Reuben, he didn't organise the training, but he implemented it. Okay. Bob Paisley, Shankly organised the training. Yeah. Bob had a big input into that, and Joe. But Reuben was here, so black t-shirt, a black tracksuit top, shorts, short socks. In the middle of winter, he'd walk up Anfield Road in his shirt sleeves, and you'd say to him, "You're not cold, Ben? You're not cold." "I come from Aberdeen, son. This is tropical." He was that sort of man. And he also used to have a thing where he said, when we were training, he'd get us young lads together, and we were all about 17 at the time, and he's 42, whatever he is. He said, "Right, but I'm a sprint test," he said. "All of you against me," he said, "and it's yards for years." So we had to give him like 30 yards start, 1 yard for each year. Yeah. Never beat him, and he was an amazing character. Some of the stories he told us. He told us one story. He said, when he played for Third Lanark in Scotland, he held the world record for the longest punch out of a goalkeeper. And we thought, "What are you talking about, Ben? That's rubbish." No, it's true, son. He said, "I was playing at Starks Park against Raith Rovers," he said, for Third Lanark. He said, and this ball come across from the right wing. I came out my goal line. He said, I jumped as hard as I could, put my knees in the back of the goalkeeper, thumped the ball as hard as I could, went right out the stadium, landed in the goods carriage, ended up in Aberdeen. And he was right, because he wasn't right about the story, but he was right about the location, because Starks Park is right next to the railway line between Edinburgh and Aberdeen. So, he told us all those stupid stories, just to give us a laugh,
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a bit like who scored the goal out from furthest out at Anfield, and it was St. John, because he scored from Hunts Cross.
Right, that's a cracker, isn't it? Yeah. He also told us a story when he used to get injured and he'd go down, He said, we didn't go down in junior football in Aberdeen, he said, because we played in cinder pitches. And if we went down and lay down more than a minute, the trainer came on with a wire brush, not a magic sponge. It was all nonsense, of course, but he was a character, and a great character.
And like all the boot room boys, he was already at Anfield when Shankly arrived, so he was there. So was Bob Paisley.
Yes.
So was...
Joe, wasn't he? Joe was there, wasn't he?
Joe Fagan, yeah.
Albert Shelley.
What Shankly did, which is quite amazing, he didn't sack them all.
No.
He said, look, I'll work with you. Just be honest with me. Don't come telling any tales, because if you do, you're the one in trouble, and let's all stick together.
Yeah.
And by doing that, he created a dynasty of success at Anfield.
Yeah,
because there are a lot of people who've been successful managers in English football. People like Alex Ferguson, people like Arsene Wenger.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but Jose Mourinho, Matt Busby, Don Revie, but Brian Clough. But they've all got one thing in common, that when they left their clubs that they were successful with, the clubs went backwards. Now, when Shankly left Liverpool, we became even more successful. Mm. Now, that is amazing. That is a fantastic legacy that Shankly built at Anfield. And that's unique, isn't it, in English club football? Well,
those lads, they were all ahead of the time. The training methods were ahead of the time. I described them in the book. I mean, they could be doing it today. Some of the stuff that they actually did then. They had shooting boards, which put pressure on people to be under pressure for a couple of minutes in the shooting boards, hitting the ball, catching it, turning, hitting it, catching it, shooting at the goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper missed it. It hit the board and came back. You rebounded it in again. And then the reserves came in, did the same thing. You did laps of the pitch. And while you were doing a lap of the pitch, the other boys were on weights and step-ups, and then you had five-a-sides, and you loved the ball, five-a-sides, So the whole thing was planned. You had to go back to Anfield on the coach, have a bath in Anfield. Well, he didn't believe in an instant bath because he wanted the pores, things like the pores had to close, before you had a bath. So we're thinking medically all the time. Bob Paisley was a brilliant physiotherapist. He was so brilliant. We used to play five-a-sides, and Bob's cartilage would come out, and he'd put it back in himself.
Jeez. And
carry on playing. I mean, you wouldn't believe that, really, but it was true. So they were way ahead of their time. And on top of all that, Shankly had the charisma to interact with the public and the media. Yeah. So he was the front man, where Bob Paisley was like the... and Morecambe and Wise, Shankly would have been Eric Morecambe, and Bob would have been Eddie Wise, Yeah,
he's a very quiet man, wasn't he, Bob Paisley?
Yeah, but brilliant. Lovely man.
I mean, I think... Possibly. Well, we all know that Bob Paisley was our most successful manager.
What success he had, in
terms of trophies, because in 9 seasons, we won 19 major trophies, 6 league titles,
incredible.
A UEFA Cup, 3 European Cups, now called the Champions Leagues. And I remember they said to Bob Paisley at the end of his career, well, Bob, you've had the most fantastic time as manager of Liverpool. I mean, the most successful period in their history. Paisley said, well, it's not all been success, I mean, I've been here during the bad times. I mean, we came second once.
They had some great quips, didn't they? Somebody says, Shankly, he struggled a bit last week, Bill. Here we are struggling at the top of the league. All sorts of things he used to come out with, Nothing fazed them. But you're right, what a legacy they left for the next generation, when you look up, to even right up to today. I remember Shankly said to me and my dad, my stepfather, we're in centre circle. He brought us out in the centre circle, and he said to my dad, who'd come down for a visit, see how I was doing with the digs and everything. And he said, "You boys lucky to be here, Mr. Scott." He said, "This place is going to be a bastion of invincibility. They'll all come here and be beaten, every one of them. They'll all come here and be beaten, son. You're very lucky, George." Now, remember, they're still coming here to be beaten.
You said in your book that there was a room, like a meeting room, in the same area where the change rooms were and Shankly's office was, and that would be used for crisis meetings, like if we lost a home game.
The snooker room, yeah.
The snooker room, a crisis. We lost a home match.
That's right. Yeah, it was. Yeah. I remember the story. Poor Phil Tinney. Phil was a wonderful player. He scored 3 goals in the FA Youth Cup final over the 2 legs, and later transferred to Dundee. He was in digs with me, Phil, and it was this particular game, the Echo Cup final, I think it was.
Oh yeah,
Liverpool Echo, and we were Shankly was insistent we had to be at every game. If it was a game at Anfield, we had to be in the bandbox. We used to have the bandbox next to the players' tunnel, where the old band used to stand before the games.
So it'd be like the brass band kind of thing.
We'd expect all the reserves, young lads, apprentices. Shankly would be in the stand, and he'd be eyeing up who was there, And this lad Phil Tinney, they'd lost a game on a Saturday, I think. And we were all convened into the snooker room. And Shankly said to Joe Fagan, "Where's Tinney?" Phil, yeah. Where is he? Oh, he's sweeping out the away dressing room, boss. Get him in here. So Phil gets dragged in like a criminal, like a bank robber. He's in the middle of all the guys. They're all sat around on other benches. Where were you last night, son? I was at the Walton Astoria. The Walton Astoria. Who with? My girlfriend. You should be in Walton jail. It's a game on Anfield. You've missed it. Don't let it happen again. Reuben, give him extra training. Extra training tomorrow. You wouldn't believe it, the things.
In your book, you told me a part of the stadium that I'd never heard of, the bandbox, which, as you say, was like a continuation of the dugout, but
just a recess. It was a recess.
Yeah, but there's no roof on it, was there?
No.
So I'm going to ask you a question. See if you know this one. Where in Anfield was the pulpit? Because that's where I went for my first match. The pulpit.
The pulpit. Well, I have to admit, I don't know where the pulpit was.
Okay, if you face the Kop from the pitch, the top right-hand corner was the boys' pen.
The boys' pen.
But the top left-hand corner, there was a small flight of stairs, a wall in front, and then underneath was a passageway which led down to the steps going out.
Right.
That area was called the pulpit.
Right, I never knew that.
Yeah, because you were up on high and you were looking down at everybody with a wall in front of you. And my dad took me in there. He put me against the wall. He put a hand either side of me and stood behind me. And I watched my first game from the pulpit. So there you go.
Fantastic memories.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. However, I would like to thank our special guest, George Scott, for his time and his stories. Please do buy his book, The Lost Shankly Boy. I also like to thank our sponsor, Brandhones, who are looking for building land across the northwest of England for social housing development, from 2 acres down to half an acre, and an acre is about the size of a football field. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please do like, share and rate our podcast episodes, and it does help to spread the word. If you'd like to sponsor us, please contact us on our website, sweetsilversong.co.uk. If you would like a podcast episode made in memory of a loved one, sponsorship can be as little as £50. So until next time, thanks for listening, and you'll never walk alone.